Dr. Kim Jin-ho stepped through the sliding doors of Conference Room 7, aboard the space station Concordia. The room was cold and bright, with white walls and a long metal table in the center. He carried his translation equipment in a small, black case, the same case he had used for dozens of meetings, just like this one, at 32 years old. Jin-ho had spent the last 10 years learning alien languages. He could speak to bug-like creatures, crystal beings, and even the strange gas cloud, people from the outer rim. Today felt like any other day. The job was simple. Help to alien groups talk about who gets to dig rocks out of some distant planet. He set his equipment on the table and looked around the room. On one side sat the Zelathi insect-like beings with big compound eyes and thin arms. They made quiet clicking sounds when they talked to each other. Their leader was tall and green, with wings that folded neatly against his back. Jin-ho had worked with Zelathi before. They were usually honest and kept their promises. On the other side of the table sat the Kritok. These aliens looked like walking crystals, clear and shining under the bright lights. When they spoke, their voices made the air shake with musical sounds. Their leader was a beautiful blue crystal being who hummed softly while waiting for the meeting to start. The always wanted everything to be perfect and exact. Jin-ho had translated for both groups many times before. The Zelathi from the eastern part of the galaxy wanted to mine metals from a planet near the star Vega. The Kritok said the planet belonged to them because their ancestors had visited it long ago. It was the kind of argument that happened all the time in space. Usually, these meetings ended with both sides sharing the planet and everyone going home happy. He plugged in his translation headset and turned on the computer. The screen showed 43 different alien languages, all ready to help him understand whatever the two groups might say. He had learned most of these languages by living with alien families, studying their culture, and even eating their strange foods. Some languages used sounds, others used smells, and a few used colors that changed on their skin. The Zelathi leader, whose name sounded like clicking insects, stood up first. "We thank the human translator for coming today. This should be a simple matter to resolve." Jin-ho translated the words into the musical language of the Kritok. Their blue leader replied with a series of beautiful notes that meant, "We agree. Let us begin with honor and respect." Everything seemed normal. The two groups had brought their legal documents, maps of the planet, and historical records. Jin-ho translated back and forth as they discussed mining schedules, profit sharing, and environmental protection. The Zelathi wanted to dig during the planet's summer months. The Kritok preferred the winter season when their crystal ships could land more easily on the frozen ground. But as the hours passed, Jin-ho began to notice something strange. His translation computer was picking up other signals from the Zelathi. Most translators only listened to the main language, but Jin-ho's equipment was special. It could detect the chemical smells that some aliens used to talk privately to each. Other Zelathi were releasing tiny amounts of scent into the air. These smell messages were completely different from what they were saying out loud. While their leader talked about fair mining agreements, the chemical signals spoke of something much darker. Jin-ho's computer slowly decoded the hidden messages. Preparation complete. Timing confirmed. No witnesses. His hands began to shake as he realized what was happening. This was not a normal business meeting. The Zelathi had not come here to share a planet with the Kritok. They had come to kill them. Jin-ho looked at the Kritok delegates, still humming peacefully as they discussed technical details about mining equipment. They had no idea that death was sitting across the table from them, hidden behind polite words and fake smiles. He tried to stay calm and keep translating, but his voice started to crack. His job was to remain neutral, to never take sides in alien disputes. Translators were supposed to be invisible, just helping different species understand each other. But how could he stay quiet when he knew that innocent beings were about to die? The Zelathi leader was still talking about mining schedules, but the chemical messages grew stronger. Jinho's computer detected new sense. Weapon ready. Begin Phase 1. Seal all exits. Through the conference room's windows, he saw Zelathi soldiers in the hallways outside. They were not wearing the usual ceremonial uniforms of diplomats. Instead, they carried real weapons and moved with the quick, sharp motions of trained killers. The Kretok continued their musical discussion, completely unaware of the danger. Their crystal bodies reflected the room's lights like beautiful diamonds. But Jinho now realized those same bodies would soon be shattered on the floor. He had come here thinking it would be just another routine day of translation work. He had even told his assistant back on Earth that he would be home by dinner time. But as the Zelathi's secret messages grew more urgent and the soldiers outside prepared for attack, Jinho knew that nothing about this day would be routine. The massacre was about to begin, and he was the only one who knew it was coming. The clock on the wall showed 3 hours since the meeting had started. Jinho wiped sweat from his forehead as he continued translating between the two alien groups. But his special computer kept picking up those strange chemical messages from the Zelathi. The smell words were getting stronger and more frightening. His translation screen flashed with new decoded messages. The words made his stomach feel sick. Bioweapon ready for release. Target elimination confirmed. 0 survivors protocol active. Jinho read the messages 3 times, hoping he had made a mistake. But the computer was never wrong about translations. The Zelathi were not here to talk about mining rights. They were here to murder every single Kretok in the room. Jinho looked across the table at the beautiful crystal beings. They were still humming softly to each other, discussing how many tons of metal they could dig from the planet each year. Their clear bodies sparkled under the bright lights. They looked so peaceful and trusting. They had no idea that death was sitting just a few feet away from them. His hands started shaking so badly he could barely hold his translation device. Every rule he had learned in translator school told him to stay quiet and neutral. Translators never took sides. They never got involved in alien politics. They just helped different species talk to each other, and nothing more. But how could he stay silent when he knew innocent people were about to die? Through his headset, he heard more. Chemical messages from the Zelathi. Poison gas prepared. Ventilation system compromised. Crystalline nervous system dissolver ready. The words hit him like ice water. The Zelathi had created a special poison designed to kill crystal beings. It would dissolve their nervous systems from the inside, causing terrible pain before death. Glanced toward the door, and his heart nearly stopped. Zelathi's soldiers were moving in the hallway outside. They were not the ceremonial guards who usually protected diplomatic meetings. These were real fighters with real weapons. They moved quietly and quickly, taking positions at every exit from the conference room. The Zelathi leader continued talking about mining equipment while releasing more chemical commands. Seal all escape routes. Prepare for deployment. Begin final phase. One of the younger Kretok delegates, a small green crystal being, started to look confused. She touched her throat and made a strange sound, like a broken musical note. Her crystal body began to show tiny cracks near her neck. Jinho realized with horror that the poison was already in the air. The beautiful blue Kretok leader noticed her colleague's distress and asked in musical tones, "Are you feeling well, sister?" But even as she spoke, small cracks began appearing on her own crystal arms. The Zelathi leader smiled with his insect mouth, but his compound eyes were cold and empty. He released more chemical signals. Weapon deployment successful. Targets are responding to toxin. Maintain diplomatic appearance until complete dissolution. Jinho watched as more Kretok delegates began showing signs of poisoning. Their clear crystal bodies were developing hairline cracks that spread like spider webs. Their musical voices became harsh and discordant. One of the older delegates fell from his chair onto the metal floor with a sound like breaking glass. The blue Kretok leader tried to stand up, but her legs would not support her weight. Something is wrong, she sang in a voice filled with pain and confusion. I feel, breaking, inside, double quotes. Jinho's mind raced. His translator's oath said he must remain neutral in all disputes between alien species. He had signed papers promising never to interfere in diplomatic negotiations. Breaking that oath would end his career and probably land him in prison. But if he stayed silent, every Kretok in the room would die in the next few minutes. More Zealoty soldiers appeared outside the windows. They carried strange weapons that looked like spray tanks. Jinho realized they planned to flood the entire room with poison gas to finish off any survivors. Another Kretok delegate collapsed, her crystal body shattering as it hit the floor. The sound echoed through the room like a scream made of broken music. Her fellow delegates tried to help her, but they were all beginning to crack and break from the invisible poison. The Zealoty leader stood up and made a formal announcement. It appears our Kretok friends are experiencing some medical difficulties. Perhaps we should call for emergency assistance. But his chemical signals told a different story. Dissolution proceeding on schedule. No medical intervention permitted. Prepare secondary weapons for final cleanup. Jinho looked at his translation equipment, then at the dying crystal beings, then at the armed Zealoty soldiers surrounding the room. Every instinct told him to run, to save himself, and let the aliens sort out their own problems. But as he watched another young Kretok delegate fall to the floor in pieces, something inside him snapped. He could not stand by and watch innocent beings die when he had the power to warn them. Jinho took a deep breath and made a choice that would change his life forever. He turned off his translation equipment and prepared to break every rule he had ever learned about being a neutral translator. The massacre had begun, but he would not let it continue without a fight. Loud warning. Sirens began screaming throughout the space station. Red lights flashed on and off as the computer systems detected poison in the air. The station's voice announced over the speakers, biological contamination detected. Emergency protocols activated. All personnel evacuate immediately. Jinho watched as more Kretok delegates fell to the floor. Their beautiful crystal bodies were cracking and breaking like expensive glass dropped on concrete. Their musical voices, which had been so peaceful just minutes before, now sounded like broken instruments screaming in pain. The sound was horrible and heartbreaking. The Zealoty soldiers stopped pretending to be peaceful diplomats. They threw off their fancy ceremonial robes and pulled out real weapons, plasma guns that could melt metal, energy blades that could cut through anything, gas, sprayers filled with more poison. Their compound eyes glowed with excitement as they prepared to finish killing the remaining Kretok. But Jinho remembered something important from his years of studying alien behavior. During his training, he had learned that Zealoty soldiers were like programmed machines. Their military conditioning was built into their DNA. When they heard certain chemical commands, their bodies would obey even if their minds wanted to do something else. He looked around the destroyed conference table and saw broken glass containers that had held Zealoty markers. These were special chemicals used in their diplomatic ceremonies. Most humans thought they were just pretty decorations, but Jinho knew they were actually a complex chemical language. His hands moved quickly, mixing different chemicals from the broken containers. His years of studying Zealoty culture had taught him which smells meant what. He combined the scent for immediate danger with the chemical for retreat to safety, and the pheromone that meant direct military order. 3 Zealoty soldiers were advancing toward a wounded Kretok delegate who was crawling across the floor, her crystal legs shattered but still trying to escape. They raised their plasma weapons to finish her off. Kethel Morthaz, Jinho shouted. At the top of his lungs, the words meant retreat immediately in the ancient Zealoty military language. At the same time, he threw his homemade chemical mixture into the air. The 3 soldiers stopped in the middle of raising their weapons. Their compound eyes went blank and confused. Their DNA programming kicked in, overriding their mission orders. They turned around and walked quickly toward the exits, their minds unable to resist the chemical command that had been bred into their genes for thousands of years. But more soldiers were coming through the doors, and the surviving Kretok were still dying from the poison in the air. Jinho needed to do something bigger and more desperate. He remembered an old Kretok war song he had learned years ago. While studying their ancient history, most scholars thought it was just mythology, but Jinho had always suspected it was real. The legend said that when crystal beings sang together in perfect harmony, they could make their voices into weapons. He looked at the 6 Kretok delegates who were still alive, though their bodies were covered with cracks and their voices were weak with pain. "Listen to me," he called out to them in their musical language. "I know the song of shattered mountains. Sing with me or we all die." The blue Kretok leader looked at him with surprise. Her voice was broken and harsh from the poison, but she managed to say, "That song is forbidden. It destroys everything it touches." "Good," Jinho replied grimly. "That's exactly what we need right now." He began to sing the ancient war chant in the deep, low tones that Kretok used for their most sacred ceremonies. His human voice was not built for their crystal harmonies, but years of practice had taught him how to make the right sounds. The surviving Kretok looked at each other with fear and hope. Then, one by one, they joined their cracked and painful voices to his. Together, they began to sing the forbidden song that their ancestors had used to fight wars among the stars. The sound was incredible. It started as a low humming that seemed to come from inside the metal walls of the space station. Then it grew stronger and louder, making the air itself vibrate with power. The frequency was perfectly designed to resonate with metal and crystal, turning solid objects into weapons. The station walls began to shake and crack. The metal table split in half with a sound like thunder. The windows developed spiderweb patterns that spread across their surface. The Zelethi soldiers who were still in the room grabbed their heads and screamed in pain. Their insect ears could not handle the powerful sound waves. Some of them fell to the floor unconscious. Others dropped their weapons and ran for the exits. But the song was just getting started. The Kretok delegates, despite their injuries and poisoning, sang with all their remaining strength. Their voices combined with Jinho's human tones to create something that had never existed before. A hybrid war song that used both crystal harmony and human determination. The entire conference room became a weapon. The walls cracked in pieces. Of metal fell from the ceiling. The lights exploded in showers of sparks. The floor began to buckle and twist under the assault of pure sound. Jinho had come to this meeting as a simple translator, someone who helped different species understand each other with words. But now he had become something completely different, a warrior who fought battles using the power of language itself. The fight for survival had only just begun. The conference room looked like a nightmare painted in alien blood. Blue-green liquid from wounded Zelethi mixed with the silver fluid that leaked from cracked Kretok bodies. The metal floor was slippery and dangerous, covered with broken glass, twisted metal, and the remains of destroyed equipment. Jinho stood in the middle of this chaos, like a conductor leading a deadly orchestra. His voice jumped from one alien language to another, faster than his mind could think. He would scream commands in Zelethi that made enemy soldiers freeze in place, then immediately switch to gentle Kretok whispers that helped the crystal survivors focus their remaining strength. "Velthak, Nulkress," he shouted at a group of Zelethi soldiers who were trying to surround a wounded Kretok delegate. The words meant total muscle paralysis in their military command language. 3 soldiers immediately stopped moving, their bodies locked in place like statues. Their compound eyes showed confusion and fear as they tried to understand why their legs and arms would not obey their minds. Without pausing to breathe, Jinho turned to the surviving Kretok and sang a focusing mantra in their ancient meditation. Language Shalter Nim Valdez's Korath. The words helped calm their minds and coordinate their movements. Even though their crystal bodies were cracked and bleeding silver fluid, his throat felt like it was on fire. Human vocal cords were not designed to make the clicking sounds of Zealothy speech or the deep harmonic tones of Kritok singing. Every word he spoke caused sharp pain in his neck and chest. Blood began to drip from the corners of his mouth as the delicate tissues in his throat tore from the impossible sounds he was forcing them to make. But he could not stop. Every word was a weapon that could save a life or end one. Every phrase could mean the difference between survival and death for everyone in the room. A large Zealothy commander, with scars across his compound eyes, pushed through the crowd of paralyzed soldiers. He carried a vibroblade that hummed with deadly energy, its edge sharp enough to cut through metal like paper. The commander's wings buzzed with anger as he charged directly at Jinho, determined to silence the human who was disrupting their carefully planned massacre. Jinho watched the commander approach and realized he had only seconds to act. Normal Zealothy paralysis commands would not work on a high-ranking officer. Their minds were too well trained to fall for simple chemical tricks. He needed something more powerful, something that would attack the commander's very soul. In that moment of desperate fear, Jinho remembered something from his deepest studies of Zealothy culture. Every member of their species had a true name, a secret word that contained their entire identity and life force. These names were never spoken aloud except during the most sacred ceremonies. To say someone's true name backwards was considered the worst possible curse. Something so evil that it could destroy a person's mind completely. Jinho had learned the commander's true name years ago during a cultural exchange program. He had never expected to use such forbidden knowledge, but now he had no choice. As the vibroblade swung toward his head, Jinho spoke the commander's true name backwards in the old Zealothy tongue, Kethmorvel Zithrin, Aldus Navokthul. The effect was immediate and terrible. The commander stopped in mid-swing as if he had run into an invisible wall. His compound eyes went completely blank. His wings stopped buzzing and folded against his back. The vibroblade fell from his nerveless fingers and clattered across the metal floor. The proud warrior collapsed like a broken puppet, his mind completely shattered by the psychological assault of hearing his own identity spoken as a curse. Around the room, the surviving Kritok delegates fought with new strength and hope. Their crystal bodies rang like temple bells as they followed Jinho's strategic commands. When he sang attack frequencies in their war language, they focused their harmonic voices into sonic weapons that shattered Zealothy armor. When he whispered defensive mantras, they coordinated their movements like a single living organism. The tide of battle was finally turning in their favor. Zealothy soldiers who had entered the room confident of easy victory now found themselves facing an enemy they could not understand. How could a simple human translator command both their own paralysis reflexes and the crystal being's sonic abilities? More enemy soldiers fell to Jinho's linguistic weapons. He spoke words of confusion that made them attack each other instead of the talk. He sang songs of fear that sent them fleeing toward the exits. He whispered commands that turned their own instincts against them, but the cost was becoming clear. Blood now poured freely from Jinho's mouth and nose. His voice was becoming hoarse and weak from the impossible strain. His human body was not designed to channel this much linguistic power. Every word he spoke took a piece of his life away. The surviving Kritok gathered around him like crystal angels, their broken bodies still singing war songs as they protected their unexpected human champion. They had come to this meeting as peaceful diplomats, but now they fought like the ancient warriors their ancestors had been, together. The translator and the crystal survivors continued their desperate battle, using the power of language itself to fight for their lives against overwhelming odds. The war of words was far from over. 4 hours after the fighting had started, the heavy metal doors of Conference Room 7 finally burst open. Station security forces poured through the entrance wearing full combat armor and carrying plasma rifles. They had been trying to break through the Zealoty barricades for hours, but the enemy soldiers had welded the doors shut from the inside. What they found inside the room made even the experienced security officers stop and stare in shock. Dr. Kim Jin-ho stood in the center of the destroyed conference room like a ghost covered in alien blood. His white shirt and dark pants were soaked with blue-green Zealoty blood, and the silver liquid that flowed through Kretok crystal bodies. His hair was matted with dried blood, both alien and his own. His face was pale and exhausted, streaked with tears and silver fluid. The room around him looked like a war zone. Broken pieces of crystal and insect armor covered the metal floor. Scorch marks from energy weapons decorated the walls. The conference table had been split in half by sonic attacks. Bodies of Zealoty soldiers lay scattered everywhere, some paralyzed, others unconscious, a few completely broken by psychological trauma. When Jin-ho tried to speak to the security officers, no sound came from his mouth except a painful whisper that was barely audible. His throat had been destroyed by hours of speaking impossible sounds. The human vocal cords that had served him so well as a translator were now damaged beyond repair. He might never speak normally again. 6 Kretok delegates slowly gathered around him, moving carefully on their cracked crystal legs. Out of the 20 beautiful crystal beings who had entered the room that morning, only these 6 had survived the massacre. Their bodies were covered with hairline fractures that would never fully heal, but their eyes still glowed with life and gratitude. The Kretok leader, a tall blue crystal woman whose face was cracked like a broken mirror but whose spirit remained unbroken, approached Jin-ho with reverent steps. She bowed deeply in the ancient manner of her people, a gesture of respect usually reserved for gods and heroes. "You saved our entire species from extinction." She sang in perfect human standard language, her voice like broken music that was still somehow beautiful. History will remember Kim Jin-ho as the human who spoke our enemies to death and gave us life with his words. The other surviving Kretok joined their voices to hers in a harmony that sounded like a prayer sung by angels made of living crystal. The sound echoed through the destroyed room, turning the scene of carnage into something almost sacred. Medical teams rushed into the room carrying emergency equipment and healing supplies. They quickly began treating the wounded survivors, both Kretok and the few Zealoty soldiers who were still alive. Investigators with cameras and recording devices started documenting every detail of the battle scene, trying to understand how a simple translation meeting had turned into such a deadly fight. Jin-ho stared down at his hands, which were stained with the blood of beings he had killed and saved. When he had woken up that morning, he had expected to spend a quiet day helping 2 alien species discuss mining rights. He had thought his job was to build bridges between different cultures using the power of words and understanding. Instead, he had discovered something terrible and wonderful about language itself. Words were not just tools for communication. They could be weapons more deadly than any gun or sword. They could paralyze enemies, drive them insane, or turn their own instincts against them. But the same words could also heal, inspire, and save lives. He had come to this meeting as Dr. Kim Jin-ho, xenolinguistics specialist and peaceful translator. But he was leaving as something completely different, a warrior who had fought a battle using nothing but his knowledge of alien psychology and his ability to speak their languages. As the medical team helped him walk toward the door, the surviving Kretok delegates applauded him with the ringing sound of crystal hands striking together. Their applause followed him down the corridor as security officers escorted him to the debriefing rooms where investigators would ask him thousands of questions about what had happened. But even as he walked away from the scene of his greatest triumph and greatest tragedy, Jin-ho could not escape the sounds that echoed in his damaged mind. He heard the screams of dying Zealoty soldiers as he spoke forbidden words that shattered their sanity. He heard the cries of Kretok delegates as poison dissolved their crystal bodies. He heard his own voice shouting commands in 40 different alien languages, each word a matter of life and death. The investigators would ask him to explain how he had turned a peaceful diplomatic meeting into a battlefield where language itself became a weapon. They would want to know every detail of his impossible victory against overwhelming odds, but Jinho knew that no amount of explaining could capture the true horror and wonder of what he had experienced. He had learned that perfect translation meant more than just understanding words. Sometimes it meant understanding that the most powerful weapon in the universe was not a gun or a bomb, but simply knowing exactly what to say and when to say it. The applause faded behind him, but the screams in 40 languages would echo in his dreams forever.